This session is to see how to create the Informatica users, set up the groups, roles, permissions, and how do we set up the LDAP for having the single sign-on, and what are the various roles which are available for an Informatica project or a data warehousing project for that matter. So let's go log into the administration console. Now the user creation process is different in version 8.6 and 9.1 from 9.1. In 8.6 you have an icon here with the human icon. The moment you click on it, it will take you to the page where you can create users, where you can see the roles and where you can see the groups. From 9.1 onwards you have a new tab called security. The moment you click on security, it will take you to the page where you can create the users, groups, and the roles. Now, before we go further on creating the roles, let's understand what are the different usernames which we have known till now during the part of our course. So, the main one is administrator. Now, within administrator, there is something called as default administrator. What is default administrator? It's nothing but the user ID which we create during the installation process. Now this default administrator username has the permissions and privileges on the domain, on the domain to create any of the application services and to assign roles to it. So whatever you have seen me doing on the admin console till now during the course is all using that default administrator. So what did it do? We were able to create, configure, and manage all the objects within the domain, which includes the nodes, the grids, the repository service, integration service, all of the IDQ services, and all of it. Okay, and along with that, with this particular username, which is the default administrator, I have gone to the client tools, configured my repository, and created folders, and then did my development as well. So it's like the topmost access which can do anything and everything within the system. Okay, that's the default administrator. There is something called as domain administrator. Let's write it here. What does the domain administrator do? Domain administrator can create and manage objects in the domain. Okay, now which means what are the objects which a domain administrator can create? It includes any of the user accounts, which means I can create a user, or whoever is assigned as a domain administrator, he can create a user, groups, or the roles. Okay, and that includes the node privileges and all the services. So it's almost like the default administrator. Now what other things can this guy do? The domain administrator will have access to the admin console where he can create all of these services. But what is the difference between the domain administrator or a default administrator? Now either of these users must explicitly give a domain administrator full permissions and privileges to the application service so that they can log in and perform the administrative tasks within the system. Where do we do that? We will look at that. So if you go to the roles, I'm in the roles tab here, system defined roles, administrator, and this is the default administrator here. If you go to the privileges, you can see the list of services which are already running and to which the accesses can be given. Okay, now by book, if you go by the book, there is another application administrator. Okay, there is another administrator role called application administrator. Now this is the guy who will have access only to the applications. When I say applications, it's nothing but the services, like your repository service or the metadata service and any of these services. Okay, so these are all as defined by the Informatica as a corporation, but practically there will be only one user, which is called the administrator. He's like, he can do everything and anything within the system, and that includes all three of this. Okay, which is a default administrator, domain administrator, and application administrator. Honestly speaking, nobody would even, I mean, you wouldn't hear any of these prefix names in any of the projects. All you would know is somebody called as administrator. Okay, let's see what are users. So I'm in the security tab, clicked on users. Now who's a user? A user is a guy or a person who can access the Power Center domain and perform a particular kind of task. What are the tasks? What are the roles? We will see them. So for a user to be created, I can click on this here, create user, or right click and create user. Okay, or I can always go here and do the create user. Now before we go there, let's understand what this folder is all about. You already have a folder called native. What does native mean? Native is nothing but a particular user who has been created within the Informatica system. Okay, now we have this installation, and let's say I have created a user called random 1234. Okay, now this user random 1234 will be only available within Informatica. That's a native user. Okay, now security is one of the core components of most of the organizations because of data issues, data security issues, or data sensitivity issues. Now if you want to have this security to be in place for the systems to make sure that it adheres to the company's policies and procedures of security, you have something called as LDAP configuration. We'll go there in a while. For now, let's see what is native authentication. Now, whenever we create a user, let's say we created this guy now, the service manager will store all of the user information under the domain. Now, if you recollect what is a service manager, it is one of the main components under domain which performs majority of the tasks. So the moment I create a user, this has been assigned under the domain with some default accesses. We'll see what those default accesses are. Now, what is this folder about? Now, this is a default folder. We never created it. That's already there. So that's a default security domain which is present in Informatica. Now, this security domain is created during the installation and we cannot delete it. See that delete option is disabled. Okay, now usually one domain will have only one folder, and if you do not have any LDAP setup done, you'll always see the native group here. Okay, we'll talk about LDAP authentication when we go into that, but a brief background about it is, let's say you have a login ID password to your machine saying Ravi, and your password is Ravi, for example. This is your network login ID password. Okay, if this is the username password which you log into the system in the company, you can use the same username password to log into your Informatica as well. That is setting up your LDAP. Now LDAP's full form is about the Active Directory on which all the users are set up, and there are multiple LDAP directory settings. We'll go there in a while. So for us to quickly understand that, let me go to actions, LDAP configuration. Now we need to give the server name here. Okay. Now what is the server name? How do we know what that server name is? That server name will be the name of the machine which is hosting the LDAP directory service. What does that mean? Now, when I said this is the username password with which you log into the system on your network, okay, now all of those are present in a directory called Active Directory. The reason I keep saying Active Directories, that's of Microsoft, and that's usually the default NTID which most of the companies use. Now, port number is the port number on which the listening of the LDAP server will happen. That's mostly the default Microsoft again. The port number will be 389 if you're using any secured setups, or if it is the default port number of LDAP, it's 636. Okay, these numbers are all present by default in any of these setups. We can always verify that. We don't have to remember it. Now, if you go to the directory service, these are the list of directory services which are available. Now you can choose from any of these based on the setup which is available in the system. Distinguished name and password of the principal user. Now who's the principal user here? This username or the name is usually the common name or the organization. Let's say we are working for IBM. So that will be the username. Okay, and for that username, whatever is the password which we give, that password should be given. Now where do we get all of this information? It's the setup which we do at the LDAP server for Informatica to connect. Okay, if you think it's a anonymous login, which means there is no specific username password, if it is some technical login with the username password, then you can leave it blank. You have to use the SSL certificate. You have three options: SSL, the Trust LDAP certificate, and if it is says case sensitive or not. Group membership attribute. Now this is the attribute or the column that contains the group membership information for this user. Now what is the membership? Let's say you are part of the administrative group who include the Unix who includes the Unix database and Informatica together. There is a group for that, right? It's called the distribution list within the system. Now those distribution lists can be listed here. What is the maximum size? Maximum number of users and groups which we can import from the system. You can do a test connection there, and once you do the test connection, if it's working, you can go to the next tab, security domains. Now in this LDAP configuration tab, we can click on add, okay, and you get an option, and here under the security domain you type the name of the security domain which you want to give. Let's say I gave IBM here. Okay, now you have native as a default security group. The moment once you submit all of these, you will get another folder there called IBM. Okay, user search base. What is user search base? That's the distinguished name for the entry for us to start the search for the users on that LDAP user. Let's say all Informatica developers or all data warehouse group developers are part of a group called DL-DWH, for example. So you can give that name there to do a filter. Okay, and then you have user filter. This is more specific to the query which we're giving. It's like a where condition. You put a where condition and specify saying not equal to DL-SQL-DWH, or just give equal to DL-DWH. Okay, group search base. If you have a group already assigned and if you know what that group is, you can give a group instead of giving the user. Leave these blank, give the group name and give the filter name. Okay, and if you go to the schedule tab here, we can schedule it by using the synchronize option. You can just specify the name and you can synchronize it whenever it is required. Now the moment you click on synchronize now, that will happen at that point in time. Okay, that's about the LDAP configuration. You can go here to see the setup of how to do that. Okay, this path you have screenshots as well. Just review it whenever you find time. Okay, I'll repeat that. It's this website. Blog, administration, and authentication console. Okay, now let's come back here. I'll click cancel here. I'll come back to the users and let's create another user. Okay, right click, create user, login name. Now the login name of the user account, usually this will be the identification, or 99% of the timings the network username, because that's unique always, and you would give a name here. Give the password. Fortunately there is no constraint saying it should have an @ symbol, number, text, and all of it. So it's mandatory. You can give even a 2-byte character, that will still work. So whatever you see here, everything is normal. You can give an email and phone number if you think you have too many users and if you have to keep track of them, you can give the email and the phone number. Okay, the moment you click OK, you get a user like this. Okay, now once you create a native user, okay, then you can see the properties with which you have created them here. Okay, now if you click on the privileges here, now see the cross mark there. Whatever cross marks are applied, that means this user do not have access to any of these. And permissions to what objects he has access, none as of now. Okay, go to the overview, edit, enable, and disable. Let's say there is a user, or there will be situations where sometimes you might have to give access to somebody from development team to do a hotfix on production environment. Okay, if they are doing that kind of stuff, you might have to give access to them only for 5 minutes. So you create a user like this, enable it, wait for 5 minutes, let them finish their work, disable it. You can use enable and disable for that. Now if you have to give access to this user, then you have to click on edit like we did, and you see the properties again, the ones which we just gave earlier. Those will be the same properties which come up, and next tab you see there is groups. Okay, click on the groups and see the groups list here. Now we can assign this native group to an existing, we can assign the user to a group here. The moment you click on add, this guy will become a dev group. If you see the example here, I have something called as US designers and offshore. Let's say I'm defining it based on on-site and offshore. So I can add him to be part of US designers if he is on-site, or offshore if he is working on the offshore system. So how did I get these lists? US designers, onshore, and offshore. That's based on the groups. Okay, if you go to the groups, you again have native folder and you have the list of groups here. I can always click create a new group by clicking here. Native, create group. Let's say I want to create another one now. I would say on-site. Okay, now for on-site, what are the privileges which this on-site developer should have? Let's say he should have access to the repository. Okay, under repository you have roles again. See the roles. Now where are all these roles coming from? Now that's for the roles part. If you want to define a privilege to him directly, let's go to the repository and see the lowest granular level of access which we can give. You can give folder, create, manage users. So check and uncheck will define what are the accesses which that particular user should have. Okay, but usually everything should be driven using the roles part of it. How do we define it using the roles? So let's go to the roles tab here. Okay, you see custom roles. You have a list of custom roles which are already created, and you have system defined roles. Administrator, this is the default administrator which you can see, and you have a whole fleet of custom roles. So you can always create a role whenever it is required based on the requirement, and you can assign the privileges to this role. Let's say Informatica deployment. Okay, what are the accesses which this guy has? He has only option to create the source and target, create the global connections, access the repository manager, because he has to deploy it. So if you go back to the deployment and the versioning part of explanations which we have done, there all he need to do the deployment is using the repository manager. So we have this given that role to him. Now if you go back to the groups and let's say on the on-site part, okay, privileges, now deployment is being done only by on-site, then you can give him, you can add that role here saying deployment. Now this group can be assigned to this user. Okay, I'll go to the groups, on-site. Right, so what did we do? We first created a user, created a group, created a role. That role is assigned to the group. The group is part of the user. Okay, so this goes one by one. Now, if you have an LDAP set up, then that LDAP part will be completely depending on what kind of Active Directory services you're using and what are the details which you have to give here. Now, most of the times this has to go hand in hand with how the current setup is done. You have to explain that this is required for your LDAP setup in Informatica to the Active Directory guys. Show them the details which you require, and these are the details which you require, and you should work with them to see how these properties can be set up at a particular time of it. Now, obviously, as you can see, this is pretty easy, straightforward. What you see is what you get types. You don't need somebody to explain all of this. But the main part which is required, especially for user access, is the roles which are present in the project. Okay. Now, in each of the project, again, based on the way they deal with the terminologies, there are multiple roles which are present in a project. Let's see one by one. Application specialist. Who's application specialist here? Application specialist is the guy who does the, well, we can say he's the project manager who knows in and out of the application, how the data flow comes in, what are the targets, what are the source systems, what are the different systems, how do you connect to them, and all of those. Okay, so it's like, let's put it this way. He's a guy who's present in the company for more than 10 years, and he has already worked with multiple systems. He knows in and out of how to integrate, how to set up and create things. And then you'll have business analyst. Now, almost the same qualification as the above, but on the non-technical front, which means he would be more on the domain specific side of content and understands the layman language of the requirement and tries to put that in the technical language of it. Okay, and then you have project manager, which is obviously there. Then we need data architect. Who's the data architect? He's the guy who actually creates or builds the flows on how the system should be. Now, let's say if you should have staging area, if you get a flat file, do you have to put all of that in the temporary table first? Should that table be truncate load and all of that? If it is not truncate load, how many days will you keep the data there? Will it be 4 months, 6 months? What will happen after that? Should it be archived? And all of those things. Now, what is the difference between data architect and application specialist? This guy is more to do with technical things within the systems, between the systems. Data architect is also on the similar lines, but will give you more information on how the logical and the physical data models work, and what is the default metadata which should be set up, the standards which the development team should follow, and all of it. Okay, and then we have the developer or the designer or the ETL developer, which is the people who understand who will understand the business requirements, try to put them in the flow using their client tools, your mapping designer, workflow, scheduling, and all that. And if you have IDQ, you'll have a separate one called DQ developer. If it is not there, if it's only Power Center, we use the Power Center only. And then analysts again, let's call them as, in other terms, those are called as data stewards. And we can, in our language, it's nothing but the business users who use the analyst tool, who does your profiling, scorecarding, join analysis, and all of that. Okay, and then you have the WH administrator. Who's this guy? This is the almost similar to the role of a DBA. What does this guy do? This guy will purely take care of your metadata setup and understands your enterprise data warehouse environment, tries to see if the setup or the extraction, transformation, and load is happening as per the data model. He'll try to set the standards, procedures, best practices, performance tuning, bottleneck identification, and all that. So it's like almost like the administrator role which we are talking about. Okay, and obviously we have a DBA and then a Unix role, guys, based on the installation which you are having. Unix administrator, and the users, obviously, who will do the UAT testing, and the final business users, who are also called as end users. Now these are the guys who will actually fund the technical team for their jobs to be more easier. So that's the end user. Now this is for a usual Power Center project with Power Center and data quality. Let's say there is master data management. Then you'll have something called as MDM manager, who actually checks your data lineage, tries to formulate and implement the metadata strategy, the way you should capture and integrate the heterogeneous metadata sources, design the metadata repository model, try to leverage the options already having within the system to get the metadata access part of it. Okay, and over all of this, you'll have the Informatica administrator, who will literally take care of all of this. The moment there is a requirement, he should be able to understand all of this. Based on all of this information, he should be able to manage the domain, the nodes, the services, application services, design a disaster recovery plan, see the failover strategies, check if the high availability is set up and if the system is really highly available, and do you have proper backups, snapshots being considered Are the users being managed? How is the monitoring happening? Is the monitoring automated, or if the deployment processes are automated? How are the software updates coming up? Should we need any software upgrades? And what else? Deployment rules, high availability, plugins, code pages, tests to be done, and last but not the least, the upgrades. If there are any upgrades, it's the role of the administrator to do the upgrades part of it. Okay, so that's most of it. The other one which we might need, so this is called as the administrator or the L3 support. There is L1, L2 support, which is like you're monitoring the Informatica monitor, sending mails to guys, whoever are relevant, putting stuff in documentation, raising incidents, raising tickets, contacting the respective team, arranging calls, and all of it. And this is mostly to do with support. Apart from all of this, you have QA team, who will do your test analysis once the development is done, your unit testing, and then all of these operations are being done by the QA team. Now, what is the reason for me to talk about all this? Isn't this common in all of the projects? Why do we have to talk about this especially here? It's because each of this is a separate requirement for you to create the users. Now it completely depends on how you want to deal with it. If you see the list here, there are some custom based rules which are already defined. Now these rules can be attained by using the default ones. If you do not see a specific role, let's say there is a guy who has to do both deployment and development. Now he should be part of two roles, right? Which means there should be two groups which will match both the roles, right? And this user should be created. Now if you don't want to have a group and a role and link that to user, directly go to the user, give whatever access he should be having it. Okay, go to the privileges tab here and directly give him whatever access he should be having it. Okay, that will more clearly solve the issue. Okay, now how do you get the list of all the users who has access to XYZ? Now unfortunately there is no option for you to export something from here or download something or get the list, or if you, there might be a request to you to from the system manager to see who are the guys who has logged into the system in the last 6 months. Just remove all the guys who have not logged in the last 6 months. Right? How would you get all that list? You have to use the pmcmd commands to get that users list. We will talk about those pmcmd commands and the usage during the session on the command line privileges. So that's most about the user groups and roles and privileges on your systems. If you just review it, like I said, it's like what you see is what you get types. Just review it. Obviously questions are open. Just send me the questions and I'll reply to you on that. That's about the user roles and privileges, the LDAP setup part, and yep, that's mostly about it. Okay, just review it and let me know if you have any questions. Okay, thank you.